Hello everyone, welcome to Ubisoft. My name is Amit, and today we are going to see Spring Security 6 plus Oauth 2. Now, before we start that video, let me tell you what things that we already covered in last session. So we have already covered that form-based authentication authorization. Okay, so where we use both custom and default page. Apart from this, we have already completed the JWT authentication authorization flow, and we also covered the internal flow of the JWT. Apart from this, we covered that internal flow of the Spring Security. If you want expertise, okay, if you want really to be expert into the Spring Security, so for you, this video is a mandatory. Which video? This called as a Spring Security 6.0 internal flow. Now let's understand the need of Oauth 2. So let's say we have one website, okay, and on that website the user are accessing the functionalities of the website. Now in some cases we want information of the users, those are accessing our website. So for that, what we can do, we can provide a form, okay, where they can put their username, email address, contact number, and other things. But the thing is, people are impatient nowadays, and they don't have the time, okay, or they don't have that much of patience to put all the information and access your functionalities. So instead of that, providing this form, we can provide a login with the Google. Okay, so basically we can provide options called as a login with Google. When they click on that login with the Google, then Google is responsible for to provide all the information that we needed. Okay, like username, email address, and contact number to us, and we can store that information into the table. So in that way, we can get the information of user without providing the form to them. Okay, so this is called as Oauth 2. Basically, this functionality can be done through the Oauth 2 server, and there are multiple Oauth 2 servers are present in the market like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and some other servers are also there. And in today's session, we are going to see about the login with Google. Now let's see the first step of Oauth 2 configurations. So for this, we have to register our application with the Google console. Okay, let's see how to do that. So search here Google console, then click on the Google platform. Okay, Google Cloud Platform, then click on the API and services. Now click on the credentials and then click on the create credentials and OAuth client ID. Now here we have to select the application type, let's say web application. And here you can go give any name. Let's say I'm giving the AVSoft demo. Okay, AVSoft demo. Then add URL. So here we have to provide a URL. Basically, it needs our application URL localhost 8080. Okay, why we need this? I will tell you. Don't about this. Don't worry. Then the next thing is redirect URL. Okay, this is something important. Redirect URL. So provide here. So you have to provide this URL. Okay, login/oauth2/Google, and this is your application base path of your application localhost 8080. Basically, when authentication is done from the Google side, then it will redirect. Okay, basically it will call this URL. Okay, that's it. Now we are good here. Click on the create. Once we click on the create, then you can see client ID and client secrets. So these two things are most important. Okay, we have to copy this and we have to configure these things into our application. So let me note down this thing. Okay, okay, so this is the client ID and this is the client secret. Okay, this is a client ID and this is a client secret. That's it. Now we are good. Our application is registered. Basically, Google Auth 2 server, okay, provides us that client ID and secrets, which we are going to use in our application. Now let's understand the flow of Oauth 2 server. Okay, so I have already created one Oauth 2 application. Basically, it's a simple Spring Boot application. I haven't did it anything, but in case of dependencies, you need to add two dependencies. First is that Oauth 2 client dependency. Okay, you can see Spring Boot starter Oauth 2 client. Then another dependency called as a Spring Security dependency. Okay, so these two dependency that we needed. and that web is mandatory. Okay, anyway, we are going to create a REST API. After this, I have created one REST API called as a slash hello. Now let's understand the flow of OAuth2 request with the OAuth2 server. So let's say we have slash hello API, and after this, if any user call that API, then it will get intercepted by the security filter chain. In case of OAuth2 server authentication, we have to configure here one filter which is specific to the OAuth2. So that filter name is something OAuth2 filter chain, something like, okay. So don't worry about the syntaxes, I will provide you. Okay, so that request will get intercepted here. Once it get intercepted, then it will check that is secured or not secured. If it is secured, then it will redirect user toward the Google Google page, okay, Google login page. But while it is redirecting it, it will call basically to the Google OAuth2 server, okay, Google OAuth2 server login page. And here, while calling that server or redirecting toward that login page, it pass or in the URL it pass that client ID, redirect URL, and the response type and scope. So what is the scope here? Scope means basically it is something related to the profile. Okay, so let's say we want to access the email or profile or contact number, or there are some multiple type of scope. So we have to define here scope. Let's say email, username, and profile. Okay, so Google will provide this information from the that OAuth2 server. So let me repeat. So slash hello will get helped to our application. It will get intercepted by the security filter chain. Now security filter chain will redirect user toward the login page. Okay, while redirecting to the login page of the Google, it provides client ID, redirect URL, and scope. Okay, and response time. And here, user has to log in with their username and password. And also he has to provide that consent key. Okay, that application wants to access your profile or email and that some other stuff. Once that user allow, okay, or once user give the consent, okay, that is fine, and logged in with the username password. After this, that OAuth2 server will send a response, and in the response it will send an authorization code to our application. Now that authorization code will get received by the security filter chain. Now what that security filter chain will do, it will if you see here, it will create one authentication object. Okay, so there is a class name called as OAuth2 authentication token something. So basically it's an authentication class. It create an object of that authentication class, and it store that authorization code inside that authentication object. So here that security filter chain will create an authentication object and set the authorization code inside that authentication object, and it will provide that authorization code to the authentication manager. Now here authentication manager will call to the authentication provider. So as we seen in the last videos, okay, in the internal flow of the Spring Security and the JWT, we have seen that we use that database authentication provider, okay, which is by default. But here we are going to use that OAuth2 authorization and authentication. So in that case, we have to use this OAuth2 authorization code and authentication provider. Okay, so let me repeat. There is an authentication provider which has multiple types. Based on our requirement, we have to use different authentication provider. By default, it use the database level authentication provider, but in our case, we are going to authenticate with the OAuth2 server. So we have to configure this OAuth2 authorization code, sorry, authentication provider. Okay, so we'll do that thing in the security filter chain. Don't worry about this. Okay, so let me repeat this thing. The authentication provider, authentication manager will send that authentication object to the authentication, OAuth2 authorization code authentication provider. It will receive that authentication object. Then again, it will extract that authorization code, okay, from that authentication object. Now what will happen next? It will call to the Google OAuth2 server. Basically, it will do internally one API call to the OAuth2 server. In that API call, it will send that authorization code. Okay. Second thing is it will pass that client ID, then client secret, and again redirect URL. Now it will hit to the OAuth2 server. Here OAuth2 server get that authorization code, client ID, and client secret, and redirect URL. And based on that, it will return one token. Okay, it will return two token to the authentication provider. Now again, authentication provider will form one new URL, okay, and it will call to that URL. Which URL? This is also same, okay. This is also URL of the Google OAuth 2 server. So again, it will call do the API call to the for the OAuth 2 server, and um, it will pass that token, okay. So based on that token, again, Google OAuth 2 server will validate that token, and it will return that all the user information that we need, okay, all the information that we need, let's say email ID, name, or contact number, or any other things, okay, user specific things. That's it. So it will return these things to our authentication provider. Now what authentication provider will do, again, it will set that all the information inside that authentication object, okay, inside that authentication object. Now what is the next thing? Authentication manager again return this object to the security filter chain, and security filter chain will check, okay, this object is authenticated, okay, or this user is authenticated, and it allow user to access this slash hello API. But before giving the access to the slash hello API, it will create one security context holder, okay. Basically, there is a class called as security context. Inside that, it will create a security context holder, okay, and inside this security context holder, it store that authentication object which contain all the information. Now, what is the use of that authentication object or that security context holder, which we already discussed in the last video, but let me repeat, okay, in short. So in that authentication object, there that all information is there, okay, all information of the user is there. For example, email, name, user ID, something like this. So if you required, okay, if you required um, user detail in any case, then we can get that all the user detail from the authentication object, okay, when he logged in. Now the next thing is, again, it will create one session object, okay, and it provides one session ID to the session object, and it again um, copy this or same security context object, it will store inside the session object, okay. Again, that session contains that authentication object with the session ID, and it will return that session ID, okay, session ID to the end user as part of this login request. Now this session ID will get stored into the browser's cookies, okay. Whatever the browser that user is using, inside that browser there is a cookie. Inside that cookies, that session ID will get stored. Now next time when again user is trying to access our application, okay, he don't need to do the login, because with that request, okay, with that second request, it is passing the session ID as part of the cookies, okay, as part of the cookies. And when it hits to the our security filter chain, security filter chain will check, is there any session ID with them or not? If yes, then it will take that session ID and it will check with that session ID, or for that session ID, is there any session available at the server side? Yes, there is a session object with the same session ID is available. If it finds that session ID, okay, with the same session, then it will not ask to user again login again. It will directly provide the access, and it will consider that this user is logged in, and it will provide the access to the user, okay, for that slash hello API. So this is all about the internal flow of OAuth 2 server, okay. Now let's see toward the implementation. Now let's create a Spring Boot application. So here I'm selecting Spring Boot 3.3.2, which is a most stable version. Now you can provide here any name, okay, as you want, and add some dependencies. So let's see what dependency that we needed. OAuth 2 client. Then we need security, Spring security. Then apart from this, we need web. Okay, Spring Web. So these three dependency that we needed, and click on generate. And let's import this project inside our editor. Okay, so I have already imported this project called as a OAuth 2, okay, here. And here I have just created one normal controller called as @race controller, and with the mapping called as slash hello. Now let's start that application and let's hit this application. So what we can do, let's start this application. Okay, open the Chrome and then localhost 8080 slash hello. Now, if you see here, it is uh, it is diverting us on the default login page of the Spring Security. Okay, of the Spring Security, because we added that Spring Security dependency. So it apply by default. So we have to remove this, and we have to override these things with the OAuth 2 server. Okay, authentication. So let's see how to do that. Now first open the application.property, and here paste some properties. Okay, so I just copy paste these things due to save the time. Now the next thing is, if you see here, what to client registration Google client ID, we have to provide here that client ID. Okay, so we already copied this client ID. This is a client ID. Copy this and then paste here. Paste here. Okay. Now again copy the secrets and then paste here. Okay, and here you can give the scope. So in the scope we are giving the email and profile. So basically we are going to access users email and their Gmail profile. That's it. Now here redirect URL. So when that Google Auth 2 server successfully authenticate the user, then he will call, okay, or it will call our application. So our base URL is, so http localhost 8080. Okay, this is our base path of our application, and this is the URL. So if you see here, we haven't created this URL, but basically it is present inside the our application through that dependencies. Okay, now it will call, basically it's a redirect URL. Okay, so it will call this URL, and while calling this URL, it will pass that authorization code. Okay, so let me tell you let me show you this thing in the diagram. So if you see here, it will call that redirect URL, that auth to server. Okay, and it will pass the authorization code. Based on that authorization code, it will create an authentication object, and then authentication object will provide to the authentication provider, and authentication provider again will create a AP or will call the API of the Google Auth 2 server, and will pass that authorization code. And apart from this, it will pass that client secrets and redirect URL, and again that authorization code. Then again Google will return the token. Based on that token, that our OAuth 2 authentication provider can access the user profile and that email. Okay, so that's why that redirect URL is used. Okay, that we use. Now here a grant type called as authorization code. Okay, so based on the authorization code which we are getting from the OAuth 2 server, okay, we are using this code, okay, to form the request. Now we are good here. Now let's configure the security config. Okay, so let's create a security config class which I already created. So let's go inside this, and here we have to provide one annotation called as @configuration. Okay, then @enable. Okay, enable web security. Now the next thing is we have to provide, or we have to configure here security filter chain. Okay, sir, I have directly copied here to save the time. So basically we have to create one method, public security filter chain. Security filter chain input argument is http security, and we have to create a security filter chain object. If you want a detail, so please go through that in terms of Spring Security video. You will get all the things there. Okay, so http dot authorize http request, and then we have to provide lambda expressions, and here request matcher. So why this request matcher is here? Basically we can provide here URL specific configurations. For example, we have to provide, let's say public is there, then I want to provide, I want to permit that public. Okay, I don't want to provide the security here. Then I can provide here request matcher slash public and dot permit all, like this. Now, apart from this, let's say we have login page, okay, custom login page, then we can provide here slash login API and permit all. So it will not ask that authentication for this API. So in that way, we can configure this here. But right now we don't need these things in that current application. And apart from this, we have to call here any request and authenticated. That means each and every request should be authenticated apart from this login. Okay, apart from this login, and return here this Okay, here this security filter chain. When we call that build method, it will create an object of security filter chain and it will get written. That's it. So this is our security config and very less configurations here. Okay, authentication provider or to authentication provider. Do we need to configure it? No, we don't need to configure it because when we add that properties, okay, over to specific properties into the application.property, then by default it will configure that over to authorization code authentication provider. We don't need to do anything. All right, that's it. Now let's jump onto the code again. So here, so do we need this security filter chain? Yes, we need if we want to configure the APIs like this. For example, slash login slash public, and I don't want to provide the security, or I want to provide the role-based security, then we can go for that. But right now, if we add here that properties, okay. So first thing is it will configure that provider and all. Second thing is we don't need this thing, okay, because anyway by default it is configured, okay, it is configured. So you are putting these things here or not, there is no issue. Yes, if you want to permit some other app, some other URLs, then you can provide here slash login or slash public like this, okay. That's it. Now let's start the application and let's see will it work or not. Now open the browser and here localhost 8080 slash hello. Now you can see it redirects toward the Google and it is asking us to log in with Google. So click on this and then continue. After this, you can see, hello, this is auth logged in. Now, apart from this, there is another thing. So the basic purpose or the main purpose of the OAuth login is to get the user information. Because if you have, let's say, a website, okay, I already told you in the video, but let me repeat. If you have a website and on that website, some user are trying to access something and you want to collect the information of that user, and if you provide him form login username and email ID and address and all, then definitely nowadays that people are very impatient and maybe they will skip your website. Okay, so instead of that you can provide the option called as a login with Google. Once he log in with the Google, so in that case we can collect the information of that user, for example username, then email ID, and that basically that their basic profiles. Okay, we can access the basic profile and we can store that all the information to database. Now the question is how we can access this information. So as per our diagram, okay, let me show you the diagram. Once that user is authenticated successfully, then in that case that OAuth 2 authorization code and authentication provider get all the information of the user from the OAuth 2, right? That OAuth 2 server, okay, on that API call. Once he get all the information, then it will return that information in form of authentication object to the authentication manager, and authentication manager will store return that object to the security filter chain, and security filter chain will store that data inside the security context holder. That means if you want the user data once he logged in, then we can get all the information from the authentication object. Okay, so let's access the authentication object. Now let's access the information of user. So this is a hello API and I want to see how to get the information of the user. So as per diagram, as we so as per diagram, as we know that security context holder holding the authentication object. Okay, so what we can do, get the authentication object from the security context holder like this. Okay, get authentication. Once we get that authentication, from that authentication we are retrieving the OAuth 2 user object, which contains all the information of the user profile. Now the next thing is we are just getting the attribute from the OAuth 2 user object in form of map, in form of keys and value, and we are printing here. Let's see will it work or not. Now let's access the API. Okay, so it is asking continue, and you can see we can access the API. Now let's see that user detail is printed or not. Yes, you can see. So here you can see we can access all the details, okay, of the user. Like a name is AV soft, given name is AV, family name is soft, like this. Even I think it is giving us a profile picture as well, okay, profile picture. So in that way we can able to access the user information. That's all about the OAuth 2 server and Spring Security. Now in the next video, we will see OAuth 2 servers plus OpenID Connect. That means OAuth 2 server plus JWT token. Okay, so thanks for watching this video, and if you like, so please share and subscribe, and please do the comment, so I will get a motivation and I will create again a next videos. So thanks for watching video.